The African sun was unrelenting. It hovered like a burning eye in the center of the cloudless sky, pressing down on the savannah with punishing heat. The golden plains shimmered in the midday haze, and every gust of wind that swept across the land carried not relief, but dust, fine, dry particles that clung to sweat-soaked skin and stung the eyes. Samuel trudged forward, one boot after another, each step heavier than the last. His uniform, once olive green and crisp, was now soaked through with sweat, clinging to his back and chest. Dust powdered his boots and covered the rifle slung across his shoulder, the metal warm to the touch. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and blinked against the sweat that trickled into his eyes. The world was soundless except for the cheer of cicadas and the occasional whisper of the wind through the tall, brittle grass. His breathing was labored, shallow, rhythmic. It had been hours since Samuel first set out from the ranger station, and each one had drained him further. The reports had come in early that morning, poachers. They'd been seen moving into the western sector of the reserve, setting traps that targeted not just antelope or hyena, but lions. The pride that roamed these lands was one Samuel had watched over for years. He knew their territory, their migrations, even individual personalities. Some mornings he would drive out just to observe them from a distance through his binoculars, watching the cubs play, the lionesses rest, the dominant male keep silent vigil over the pride. There was something in their presence that grounded him, something noble, something ancient. And now someone had come to threaten that peace. He pressed on. A long, jagged scar stretched across the horizon, the dry bed of a seasonal stream, now empty and cracked. Samuel crossed it carefully, his boots crunching on brittle earth. He paused beneath the shade of a scraggly thorn bush and pulled his canteen from his hip. A single sip, maybe two. The water was warm, metallic, and barely refreshing. Still, he let the drop linger on his tongue before swallowing. As he rose to continue, he spotted something that made his pulse spike. Footprints. Human ones, light, deliberate, and recent. They weaved through the dry grass, leading toward a sparse line of acacia trees in the distance. He crouched down, examining the impressions. Not more than a few hours old, his instincts sharpened. He scanned the horizon, listening for anything, snapping twigs, murmured voices, the low hum of an engine. But the silence was undisturbed. Poachers were close, closer than he had expected. His hand hovered near his rifle but didn't touch it. He hoped he wouldn't need to use it. He never liked drawing it, unless absolutely necessary. There was a time, early in his career, when he believed in justice through intimidation. But the years had softened something in him, made him see the reserve not just as a place to protect, but as a living, breathing world of its own, worthy of reverence. He knew the stories of rangers who'd fired shots too quickly. Not every ending needed a bullet. Still, his heart pounded harder in his chest as he moved forward. The trees ahead stood like lonely sentinels, acacia and mopane, their thin leaves trembling faintly in the hot wind. Samuel's breath had grown shallow. Each inhale scraped at his dry throat. His head was beginning to swim. He glanced down at his canteen again. Empty. His radio crackled suddenly at his hip. A burst of static, then silence. He lifted it quickly, thumbed the button. "Ryan, do you copy?" Nothing. Again. "Ryan, this is Samuel. I'm in Sector 9, following a poacher trail toward the western tree line. Do you read?" The only reply was a low hiss of interference. Damn it! No signal. Samuel gritted his teeth. He should have waited, asked for backup. But time was never on their side when traps were involved. Lions could be caught, maimed, killed in minutes. Every delay was a risk he wasn't willing to take. He stumbled once, as he stepped over a low patch of brush, catching himself on a twisted root. The ground seemed to shift slightly beneath him. He steadied himself and pressed forward. Another 15 minutes passed before he saw it. The rusted glint of a snare. It was strung between two branches, low to the ground, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Samuel knelt beside it, examining the wire. It was the kind commonly used by bushmeat poachers, brutal, silent killers. Judging by the disturbed earth nearby, it had been set within the past day. His mouth went dry. The lions did roam through here. If one of them had been caught, it might already be too late. He scanned the ground for fresh tracks, moving slowly, carefully. His muscles ached with every shift of his weight. He tried to will his mind into focus, but his vision blurred. A wave of dizziness hit him. The world spun for a moment, then stilled, but not quite the same. His knees buckled. He caught himself with one hand on the ground, breathing hard. He had to turn back. He whispered it aloud, like saying it would make it easier. "Turn back, Samuel." But his body didn't listen. The heat had taken too much. His strength was gone. His limbs felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. His fingers trembled. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. With a final, desperate effort, he staggered toward the nearest patch of shade. A solitary acacia tree whose branches cast narrow shadows over the sunburnt earth. He reached it, half collapsed, one hand gripping the bark. Then everything went dark. His body crumpled to the ground, chest rising and falling in weak, shallow breaths. The rifle lay beside him, untouched. Dust swirled around him as the wind shifted. Somewhere far in the distance, a bird called, a sharp, lonely sound that echoed faintly in the emptiness. Beneath the tree, Samuel lay still, unmoving, in the heart of the wild, alone. And then the lions came. Shadows stretched long across the golden plain, bending with the curve of the land as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Time lost meaning beneath the acacia tree where Samuel lay still, his breaths shallow, his body overheated and parched. The rifle by his side gleamed faintly in the sun, untouched, unnecessary now. He had ventured deep into the heart of the wild, and the wild had taken him. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Then a low, rumbling growl echoed across the clearing. It wasn't threatening, not at first. It was more like a sound born of breath, a statement rather than a challenge. Samuel's fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered open, though his vision remained blurred and smeared with golden light. The world spun softly around him, and then he saw it. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. No, not one. 3. Through the wavering veil of heat and dust, shapes began to emerge. Large, slow, deliberate. One stepped forward, silent, as dusk on the savannah. A massive lion, muscles rolling under its tawny coat, its thick mane catching the light like threads of flame. Samuel's heart stuttered weakly. He couldn't move. He couldn't run. His limbs refused every desperate command his brain issued. His body, drained of water and strength, had become a cage, one he couldn't escape from. A prison of flesh. He was exposed, sprawled on his side in the dust, eyes half-lidded, weapon out of reach. The lion stood just feet away now, towering above him. Its amber eyes locked onto his, unblinking. For a second, the savannah held its breath. Samuel expected the worst. A roar, claws, teeth, the brutal laws of nature playing out in their most primal form. He braced for it, wincing from an attack that never came. Instead, the lion inhaled deeply through its nose, tilted its head slightly, and exhaled with a soft huff. It stepped forward again, slowly, but without menace. Another figure emerged from the tall grass, a lioness, lean and lithe, her movements graceful and alert. She padded forward and stood beside the male, her golden coat blending into the dying light. And then, from behind her legs, a tiny cub poked its head out, its bright eyes wide and curious. A wave of disorientation rolled through Samuel. This couldn't be real. They weren't attacking. They weren't running. They were watching him. His mouth moved, but no words came. His tongue was too dry, his throat too scorched to speak. A croak escaped him, half whisper, half prayer. The lioness flicked an ear and sat. Just sat, calm and deliberate. The cub mimicked her posture clumsily, its small hind legs slipping out from under it. The male lion remained standing, towering and unmoving, a sentinel, a guardian. Samuel's thoughts were a storm. None of it made sense. He had seen lions devour antelope in minutes. He had seen them challenge rhinos, stand their ground against elephants, and fight each other for dominance. They were wild creatures, ruled by instinct. Fierce, unforgiving. Yet here they were, this pride, gathered around him like a protective ring. The cub crept forward, inching across the dirt with curiosity leading each paw step. The lioness made a soft noise, a throaty hum, more maternal than warning, and the cub halted, ears perked. It sniffed the air toward Samuel, but did not cross the invisible line drawn by its mother's gaze. Samuel exhaled shakily, not in relief, not in fear, in awe. In this moment, under this tree, something impossible was happening. He blinked again, and in the dimming light, a memory surfaced. It pushed past the fog of heat and fatigue, rising through layers of exhaustion and time. A different day, a younger face, a desperate cry. Years ago, he had been new to this station then, eager, perhaps too eager, still proving himself. He remembered that morning well. A report had come in about a lion cub caught in a wire snare, not far from the very trail he had collapsed on today. He had rushed out with 2 other rangers, unsure what they would find. The others stayed back to cover him while he advanced alone, rifle slung over his shoulder, not out of bravado, but respect. He remembered approaching the cub carefully, his boots crunching on the dry grass. The wire was wound tight around the cub's hind leg, biting deep into the flesh. It thrashed weakly, its cries high-pitched and panicked. Nearby, the mother paced in wide arcs, roaring, grieving, furious. Samuel had knelt just out of her path, arms raised, palms up. "Easy, girl," he'd whispered, more to calm himself than the lioness. "I'm not here to hurt him." She had watched, breath ragged, eyes blazing, her tail flicking like a whip. But she hadn't charged. She had held her ground, trusted him. With every nerve screaming, Samuel had approached the cub and drawn his knife. His fingers trembled as he sawed through the snare. One wrong move, and it could be over. But he kept his hands steady. The moment the wire snapped free, the cub had limped back to its mother, whimpering. She had nuzzled it, wrapped her body around it protectively, and then turned her eyes to Samuel. That stare had haunted him for years. Not because of fear, but because of what it held. Recognition, understanding, not gratitude in the human sense, but something that transcended it. He'd never forgotten it. Now, lying beneath the acacia tree, Samuel's heart gave a weak thump as he looked at the lion standing above him. Could it be? The male, this massive, regal creature watching him now, could it be that same cub, all grown up? The thought hit him like a jolt. He stared into those amber eyes and saw the echo of that moment from years before. It wasn't impossible. Nature remembered. The pride moved as a unit now, settling in around him. The lioness lay close, her body stretched along the earth, eyes half closed but ears still alert. The cub nestled against her side. The male, Valor, Samuel, found himself thinking, naming him without knowing why, remained standing for a while longer, then slowly sank into a crouch. They weren't leaving. They were staying, guarding. The world tilted around him again. His eyelids fluttered. The heat still pulsed in his blood, but the fear was gone. Something ancient and unspoken hung in the air. Something beyond language. Trust. Connection. Samuel exhaled once more, eyes closing. The lions didn't move. And as the last light of day faded from the sky, blanketing the savannah in cool shadows and moon-pale stillness, Samuel surrendered to unconsciousness again, this time not as prey, not as intruder, but as something far rarer in the wild. Protected. The savannah changed when the sun went down. It wasn't just the temperature, though the heat gave way to a cooler breath that rippled across the grass like a sigh of relief. It wasn't just the shadows, though they lengthened, deepened, and painted the landscape with velvet stillness. It was something in the air itself. As dusk fell, the land seemed to listen, and it listened now. Beneath the crooked limbs of the acacia tree, Samuel stirred. The pain was the first thing to return. A dull, throbbing ache in his limbs. His throat was dry to the point of cracking. His body felt like it had sunk into the earth itself, limbs buried under invisible weight. He tried to move, but only managed to shift slightly, his fingers curling faintly into the dirt. His breath came slow, shallow. Each inhale was a scrape, a reminder that he was still alive, but barely. He opened his eyes. Night was descending in hues of violet and gold, the last fringes of day bleeding into the horizon. He blinked against the fading light, vision still foggy from dehydration and fatigue. Dust clung to his lashes, and the world shimmered. Then he remembered. The lions. His heart stuttered in his chest as he turned his head slightly to the side. They were still there. The male lion, Valor, sat a few feet away, his golden mane tinged with the last strokes of sunlight. His broad shoulders rose and fell slowly, and his gaze, that gaze, amber and unwavering. It met Samuel's with quiet force, a look not of challenge, but of presence, a silent acknowledgement. The lioness lay close to the cub now, her body curved protectively around the little one. Her eyes were half closed, but her ears flicked with every distant rustle. Her tail twitched. She was relaxed, but vigilant. They had not moved far. They had not wandered off into the night as he expected. They remained. Samuel tried to swallow, but his throat protested. He rasped something, maybe a name, maybe nothing at all. Valor shifted slightly, his paw dragging across the dirt in a slow arc. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. His message was already clear. I see you. Samuel's mind, clouded as it was, began to work slowly. He didn't understand how or why this was happening, but something deep in his instincts told him that he wasn't in danger. Not now. Not from them. The cub stirred, climbing over its mother's front legs and flopping into a patch of grass. It pawed at something invisible, then let out a high-pitched mewl that echoed softly across the clearing. The sound was strangely comforting. Samuel watched the pride as night settled in, the sky above them now, a canvas of indigo dusted with the first emerging stars. He could barely process the passage of time, but he knew it was slowing, stretching, as if the world had paused with him beneath that tree. A breeze moved across the land. The grasses rustled. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena whooped, shrill and eerie. Then another joined it, and another. The lioness raised her head. The cub stilled. Valor remained motionless, though the tip of his tail flicked once. Samuel's pulse quickened, not just from fear, but from the sheer rawness of what he was witnessing. He'd heard hyenas many times before, but here, now, paralyzed, vulnerable, unable to lift a weapon or call for help, it felt different. The howls grew closer. Samuel's breath hitched. He couldn't fight. He couldn't even sit up. His rifle, still lying where he had dropped it hours earlier, might as well have been on another planet. He could only watch. Two shadows appeared at the edge of the clearing. Hyenas. They crept forward, slinking low, heads bobbing slightly, their movements jerky and strange, like predators unsure of the power balance. Their eyes glowed faintly in the gathering dark. They saw him. They smelled him. He was weak. Alone. Easy prey. Samuel tensed. Valor lifted his head. The change in him was subtle, but commanding. He stood slowly, rising like a storm cloud over the clearing, muscles flexing beneath his thick hide. He didn't roar. He didn't lunge. He simply stood tall and still. The hyenas stopped. The lioness was now fully alert, her gaze narrowed, teeth just barely exposed beneath her curled lips. The cub hid between her legs. The hyenas snarled, uncertain, testing. Then Valor stepped forward once. His growl was deep and guttural, a rolling sound that vibrated through the ground, through Samuel's bones, through the air itself. The hyenas hesitated. Then, in a sudden burst of caution, they turned and melted back into the tall grass. Gone. Silence returned to the clearing. Samuel felt the breath he'd been holding leave his lungs. He watched as Valor returned to his place, slow, regal, unbothered. The lioness relaxed again, though her eyes stayed open. The cub climbed clumsily onto her side and rested its head. A wave of something powerful passed over Samuel. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just awe. It was connection. He had spent his life walking these lands, fighting to preserve them, facing down men with rifles and traps, braving the elements, staying long nights at the edge of lion territory just to document their movements. But he had never felt this close to them. Never this understood. He didn't know why they were protecting him. Whether it was instinct, recognition, or some buried memory in the mind of a once-saved cub. But they had made a choice. They had chosen to let him live. No, chosen to ensure he lived. Samuel's body couldn't do much more than lie still. But his mind was alight now, wrestling with awe and humility. He was no longer alone. Out here, in the wilderness he thought he knew so well, he had found something greater than knowledge, something greater than dominance or protection. He had found acceptance. The night deepened. The moon began its slow climb, casting silver light across the savannah. The trees whispered. The insects sang. And Samuel, nestled beneath the tree in his fragile human form, closed his eyes. Not from weakness, but from peace. He slept beneath the stars, watched over by lions. The dreams came in fragments. At first, there was only darkness, soft, weightless and silent, as if the world itself had paused to allow him rest. Then came the sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant rumble of thunder, the crackle of a radio. Familiar sounds, but far away, like echoes from a dream half remembered. In his unconscious state, Samuel drifted. But the silence did not remain. Suddenly, the world around him shimmered and reformed, not as it was now, but as it had been years ago. The memory was clear, sharper than a photograph. He saw the patrol truck bouncing over uneven terrain, red dust kicked high behind its tires. He was behind the wheel, younger, his face still unlined, his uniform clean and new. The sky above was the same cloudless blue, the sun already cruel in the mid-morning. He remembered the call that came through the old two-way radio, static breaking as a distressed voice filled the cabin. Possible snare sighting, north of the Salt Lick. Something's caught. At the time, he hadn't known what. Could have been a warthog, could have been a gazelle, but instinct told him otherwise. Something about the tone in that call made his chest tighten. He had driven faster. The scene had unfolded with the grim efficiency of a terrible ritual. A clearing ringed by mopane trees. Buzzards circling overhead. The faint metallic glint of wire twisted tight around something moving. The moment he stepped out of the truck, he heard it. A cub's cry. High, desperate, choked by fear. Samuel had never moved faster in his life. He crashed through the undergrowth, heart thundering in his ears, ignoring the branches that clawed at his arms and the thorns that scratched his boots. And there it was. The cub was small. Its fur was the soft, pale gold of a lion barely old enough to leave its den. It had been snared by one leg, the wire biting deep into the flesh, blood matting its fur, eyes wide with terror. Its tiny body shook with effort and pain. But that wasn't what made him freeze. No, what stopped him cold was the lioness. She was there, less than 10 meters away, massive, raw, with fury and fear. She paced in a wide circle, her ears flattened, tail lashing, her eyes fixed on him with a force that could melt stone. Her cub was in agony, and he was a stranger approaching with tools and a rifle. "Easy," he had whispered. "Easy now." He didn't raise the rifle, didn't even unsling it. Instead, he dropped to one knee and set it aside. His fingers had trembled as he reached into the pouch on his belt, pulling out a folding knife. The cub shrieked as he stepped closer, its limbs kicking weakly. The lioness roared. But she didn't charge. She didn't leave either. She just stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. Samuel inched forward, every heartbeat like thunder. He knelt by the cub and murmured softly, "I'm here. I'm here, little one. We're going to fix this." His knife glinted in the sun as he began sawing at the wire. The metal was thick and rusted, cutting back with stubborn strength. Each stroke was a test of nerves. One wrong move, one sudden scream, and the lioness might leap. But she didn't. She stood as still as stone, panting, her ears trained forward. It took him 2 minutes to cut the snare. 2 of the longest minutes of his life. The moment the last coil snapped free, the cub scrambled backward, dragging its wounded leg, and cried out for its mother. The lioness crossed the clearing in a flash, closing the space between them in 3 silent strides. Samuel didn't flinch. He had frozen on one knee, the knife still in his hand, trying not to breathe too loudly. But she didn't attack. Instead, she pressed her nose to her cub, checked the wound, then lifted her eyes to Samuel. They stared at each other. It wasn't hatred that he saw in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something else. Something wordless. A question answered. A choice made. She took her cub in her jaws, lifted it gently, turned, and walked away. He stayed there long after she had vanished into the bush, heart pounding, the weight of what had just passed pressing down on him like gravity. He never told many people the full story, not because he was afraid they wouldn't believe him, but because the moment felt sacred, something he wasn't meant to explain. And now, as he drifted in and out of fitful rest beneath the acacia tree, that same feeling returned. The lion in front of him, the one watching over him with silent authority, was no stranger. He knew it now. The way it moved, the way it held itself, the way it looked at him and didn't see a threat. This was that cub. All grown, strong, magnificent. Valor. That's what Samuel had started calling him in his mind. He didn't know why. Maybe it was a fragment of an old word he once read, or something that just felt right. But the name fit. Valor. The lion who remembered. Another memory surfaced, jarring and sharp. A poacher he had arrested 2 years ago. A young man caught setting another trap. Samuel had found the man near the southern ridge, just hours after a lioness was found limping with a fresh wound. He had demanded to know why the poacher had gone after lions. "They bring a high price," the man had shrugged. "Bones, teeth, blood for potions." Samuel had punched him. It was the only time in his career he had broken protocol. But there had been something in that poacher's voice, a hollow disregard. It had echoed through Samuel for months afterward. He had always tried to protect the lions, but now, lying helpless beneath the stars, he realized the lions had protected him in return. There was something powerful in that symmetry, something ancient. He stirred again. His body still ached, but there was clarity in his mind now, and a strange peace. The pride was quiet. The lioness slept with one eye half open, the cub nestled into her side. Valor remained near the edge of the tree's shade, his gaze sweeping the perimeter, alert for any threat. Samuel didn't understand it fully. Maybe he never would. But he knew this. This was no coincidence. No random mercy. This was a circle closing. A bond remembered. A trust returned. And it would change everything. Night in the savannah was a world reborn. Where the sun once reigned with blinding authority, the moon now cast silver light like a whisper across the endless grasses. Shadows took on new shapes, stretching long and sinuous across the land. The winds shifted, cooler now, carrying scents that told ancient stories to those who knew how to read them. To predators, night was an invitation, a time to hunt, a time to reclaim power beneath the veil of darkness. To prey, it was something else entirely, a test of survival. Under the crooked canopy of the acacia tree, Samuel remained in a state that blurred the edges between sleep and awareness. His body was still frail, his throat still a dry, searing wound, but his mind drifted in and out of consciousness like waves against the shore. Bits of thought surfaced, then slipped away. But one feeling persisted, unease. Something in the air had changed. He opened his eyes slowly, painfully. The first thing he saw was Valor sitting a few feet away. The lion's silhouette was outlined by moonlight, his mane rippling gently in the breeze, his body motionless yet alert. His golden eyes glowed faintly, unblinking. The lioness was awake too. She had risen to her feet, her muscles tensed, her ears flicked forward. The cub crouched low behind her legs, small and silent now. The stillness was gone. It had been replaced by a tension that crackled invisibly in the night air. Samuel didn't know what it was. He couldn't see anything past the tree line, but the lions could. Their senses reached far beyond his. Then he heard it. The sound slithered into the clearing like a warning. A snicker. No. More like a giggle, warbled and unnatural. A sound that made the skin on his arms crawl. Hyenas. They were near. Samuel turned his head with effort, trying to find them in the darkness. He saw nothing at first. Just the long, swaying grass, the brittle stalks gleaming faintly under the moon. Then movement. Low and fast. A flash of eyes. 2, then 3. Their shapes emerged at the edge of the clearing, shadows with teeth. Their laughter echoed again, higher this time, taunting, testing. Samuel's stomach clenched. He knew the way hyenas operated. They were cunning, bold, merciless in packs. They would not charge blindly, not at first. They would test the boundaries, try to split the group, isolate the weak. And what could be weaker than a collapsed human too exhausted to stand? He could smell them now. Rank, earthy, sour, the stench of dried blood and old fur carried on the wind. One of them stepped forward. Not charging, not attacking, just entering the clearing, head low, tongue flicking out. Samuel tensed. Vala didn't move. The lioness let out a low rumble. Her tail swished once, her muscles coiled like spring. The hyena took another step, then paused. Another came from the side, creeping like a shadow across the outer ring of the trees. Samuel watched helplessly. He couldn't fight. His rifle lay useless beyond his reach. Even if he had it, he doubted he could lift it, let alone aim. His hands trembled with fatigue just trying to press against the dirt. He was a witness now, not a participant. And in some quiet part of him, he realized that this was no longer his battle to fight. This was theirs. Vala stood, slowly, purposefully. The movement alone shifted everything. The hyenas halted. The lion's presence was overwhelming in the moonlight. Every inch of him radiated silent authority. He didn't roar. He didn't need to. His body said everything. Come closer, and you won't walk away. The lioness stepped forward too, leaving the cub behind her. Her body moved with fluid precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Her teeth glinted briefly as her mouth opened just enough to show what waited inside. The standoff began. 4 hyenas circled the edge of the clearing now, snarling, yipping, barking short, sharp warnings to each other. Their confidence was real, but so was their caution. They knew what Vala was. And more importantly, they knew what he was capable of. One of them lunged halfway in, just a bluff. The lioness sprang forward instantly, a burst of silent fury, and stopped only inches from the intruder. Her growl rolled low and deep, like distant thunder. The hyena retreated, teeth bared, tail tucked low. Vala did not move. He didn't need to. He was the anchor, the mountain in the storm. Samuel watched in disbelief as the predators squared off. It wasn't the first time he'd seen lions and hyenas confront each other, but never like this, never for him. Another lunge, another feint. The lioness responded again, swift and precise. Minutes passed, tense and eternal. Then, finally, one of the hyenas turned. A bark, a signal, and the others followed. They retreated into the darkness, melting back into the grass, their laughter trailing off into silence. The clearing was still once more. Samuel let out a shaky breath, his body shivering despite the warmth of the night. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been gripping the earth beneath him, his fingers clawed into the dirt as if to hold on to something, anything. Vala slowly sat again. He didn't look at Samuel. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered loud and clear. You are under my watch. The lioness returned to her cub, nuzzling it gently. The small lion pressed against her chest, comforted by the return of stillness. Samuel blinked against the tears that suddenly filled his eyes. He wasn't sure where they came from. Maybe it was the fear, or the helplessness, or maybe it was the sheer miracle of it all. That out here, in the raw, merciless expanse of the African wild, he had found something that no weapon could offer him. Protection, not because of dominance, not because of ownership, but because of trust. He thought back to all the nights he had spent in this reserve, armed, alert, patrolling for signs of danger. All the times he had watched lions from the safety of a vehicle, scribbling notes on behavior, tracking cub births, documenting kills. But nothing in all those years compared to this. This night, this moment, this silence. He was no longer just a ranger. no longer just a guardian of the wild. Tonight, the wild had chosen to guard him. The sun was barely up when the first tendrils of unease began to take root at the ranger station. At first, it was subtle. An empty coffee mug left unwashed, a radio check-in unanswered, a boot locker still closed that should have been empty by dawn. But in the back of every ranger's mind was the same thought, unspoken and heavy. Samuel hadn't come back, and Samuel always came back. Ryan stood on the porch of the command shack, his arms crossed over his chest, scanning the horizon like he expected Samuel to emerge from the tree line at any moment. That familiar, sun-hardened face and slow, tired grin announcing his return. But the trail was empty, and the morning wind carried no sound except the rustling of dry leaves and the calls of birds waking for the day. Ryan's jaw clenched. He reached for the radio again, knowing what the answer would be, but needing to try one last time. "This is Ryan to Delta 1. Come in. Samuel, do you copy?" Static. Then, nothing. Ryan lowered the handset slowly. Around him, the team moved with quiet efficiency, tension mounting with each step. There was no panic, not yet. Rangers were trained for days without communication, for long treks through the bush. But still, something felt wrong. He could feel it. "Where was he last sent?" asked Alyssa, one of the newer recruits, her voice steady but laced with concern. "He logged his last coordinates heading into Sector 9, Ryan said, pulling a folded map from the table and spreading it across the hood of the patrol truck. Said he was tracking suspected poachers near the western ridge. "That's rough terrain," added another ranger, Thomas, his brows furrowing. "Heat index was brutal yesterday." Ryan nodded. "And if his radio's been out this long, it means he's too far out. Or..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. A decision settled over him, like armor. "Gear up," he said. "We're heading out in 10. No one questioned him. Within minutes, the team moved into formation, rifles checked, canteens filled, tracking dogs harnessed and alert. The sun was climbing fast now, casting a harsh orange glow across the plains. It would be a brutal day again, and every second counted. Ryan climbed into the lead vehicle and stared at the tree line in the distance. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought screamed in his chest. "Hold on, Samuel. Wherever you are, just hold on." The drive to Sector 9 took nearly an hour. The vehicles bounced over uneven ground, dry gullies and thorny brush slowing their pace. Every so often the convoy would pause so the lead tracker could scan the terrain, leaning low over the dust, reading the land like a sacred text. Ryan barely spoke as they travelled. His eyes scanned constantly, his mind calculating the worst-case scenarios: dehydration, injury, poachers, lions. He didn't fear the animals, he respected them as Samuel did. But he also knew the rules of the wild were indifferent to titles, uniforms, or good intentions. When they reached the coordinates Samuel had last called from, the team fanned out. They found the first footprints near a dried-out stream bed. A single pair of boot prints, deep, deliberate. "This is him," the tracker said, tapping the ground. He was walking heavy, tired. Ryan followed the trail with his eyes. "Where does it lead?" "West, toward the tree cluster." Ryan turned toward the direction and felt something shift in his gut. He could see the thin line of acacia trees breaking the horizon like ink strokes on golden parchment. The wind carried the scent of dust and something else, something he couldn't name but felt in his bones. "Let's go." As they moved, the trail told a story. First, steady strides. Then, slower, uneven. The boot prints began to drag slightly. Then, a scuffle in the dirt. Knees buckled. A handprint beside a tree. "He went down here," whispered the tracker, kneeling beside the mark. "Caught himself. Tried to keep going." Ryan's throat tightened. He knelt beside the sign, brushing a hand across the faint impression of Samuel's palm in the soil. It was still there, like a ghost of effort. He pushed on, Ryan murmured, even when he shouldn't have. They moved faster now, urgency spiking through the group. The dogs picked up his scent and began to tug forward, tails rigid, noses low. Ryan jogged to keep pace. They were getting close. Then, just ahead, movement. "Stop!" the tracker hissed, holding up a fist. The rangers froze. Ryan stepped forward slowly, rifle in hand, though he hadn't raised it yet. Beyond the final stretch of tall grass, at the edge of the clearing beneath the acacia trees, they saw them. Lions. 5 in total. A massive male at the front, his mane wild and thick, his body poised and still. 2 lionesses flanking him. A cub nestled in the grass. Another young male lounging close. They weren't hunting. They weren't retreating. They were watching. Directly in front of them, not 15 feet away, lay a human figure. Samuel. Ryan's heart leapt into his throat. He didn't shout, didn't move. The lions made no aggressive motions, but their presence alone was enough to hold the entire team in stunned silence. The male lion, Valor, turned his head, not away from the humans, toward Samuel, as if guiding them with that single movement. Ryan exhaled slowly, his grip loosening on the rifle. "We approach slowly," he said. "No weapons raised, no fast movements, just follow me." The rangers exchanged nervous glances, but obeyed. Ryan stepped into the clearing like it was sacred ground. Every nerve in his body fired at once. He could feel the weight of the lion's eyes, feel the heat rising from the soil, feel his own heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. He knelt beside Samuel. His hand found Samuel's wrist. A pulse. Weak, but there. "He's alive!" Ryan called out, the relief in his voice cracking through the tension like thunder. The team surged forward, faster now, preparing the stretcher, calling for medical support. Ryan remained kneeling, staring at the lion. Valor had not moved, not flinched, not growled. His eyes met Ryan's, and in them Ryan saw something he couldn't explain. Calm. Not indifference. Not apathy. Just calm. As if the lion had known all along this would happen. As if he had been waiting for them to arrive. One of the lionesses stood, stretching her limbs, and began to move toward the shadows. The others followed. But Valor lingered. He watched as the rangers carefully lifted Samuel, placed him on the stretcher, and prepared to carry him to safety. Then, finally, Valor huffed, a low, resonant sound, almost like a sigh. He turned and walked away. Not hurried, not afraid, just done. Ryan stood frozen for a long moment, staring after him. Then he looked down at Samuel, pale and dust-covered, but breathing. "I don't know what happened out here," Ryan whispered. "But you were never alone, were you?" And somehow, in the silence of that clearing, the truth spoke back. No, he never was. The first thing Samuel heard was the sound of an engine. Low, steady, rhythmic. The second was a voice, familiar, close, tight with emotion. "Easy, Danny, just breathe." Samuel's eyes fluttered open to a haze of sunlight and dust. The roof of a vehicle swayed above him. He lay on a stretcher, his body cradled by thick straps and soft padding. Every limb ached. His tongue was sandpaper. His lips cracked. His whole body screamed with thirst and exhaustion. But he was alive. He blinked against the light and turned his head. Ryan was beside him, riding in the back of the truck, one hand resting near Samuel's shoulder, the other holding tightly to the frame as they bumped over the savannah trail. "We thought we lost you, brother," Ryan said softly, and his voice caught at the end. Samuel's lips moved, but the words were barely audible. "The lions." Ryan leaned closer. "What?" "The lions. They didn't hurt me," Samuel whispered, his voice cracked and rasping. Ryan gave a slow nod. "We saw." Samuel closed his eyes again, not in sleep, but in disbelief. The memories weren't hallucinations. The massive lion standing over him, the lioness and her cub, the deep growl that sent the hyenas scattering, the silent watch kept through the night. It hadn't been fever dreams. It had all been real. They had protected him, just like he had once protected one of them. He didn't understand how it was possible, but he felt it deep in his bones, as certain as the rising sun. Vala had remembered. The rest of the drive back to the station passed in fragments. The hum of tires, the flicker of passing acacia trees, the concerned murmurs of voices around him. A water bottle pressed gently to his lips. Cool relief as he drank in tiny sips, tears springing to his eyes at the simple, saving taste. By the time they arrived, medical personnel were waiting. Samuel was lifted carefully from the vehicle and taken to the ranger station's infirmary, a small but well-equipped structure tucked near the rear of the outpost. He heard radios crackling. He caught glimpses of worried faces. Saw the outline of Alyssa pacing near the gate. Tomas speaking into a walkie-talkie with a stiff posture. But most of it blurred into a fog of heat and weakness. Inside, the infirmary was dim and cool. The cot was a mercy. As he sank into it, clean sheets pulled over his dust-streaked body, Samuel finally let go. Sleep swept over him like a tide, merciful and deep. When he awoke, it was night again. A single lamp glowed softly beside the cot. Crickets chirped beyond the walls, a gentle chorus of wilderness at peace. Ryan sat in a chair near the window, scribbling into a small field notebook. When he noticed Samuel stirring, he set it down and rose, pulling his chair closer. "Welcome back," he said, smiling. Samuel swallowed. His voice was stronger now, but his body still felt leaden. "How long?" "Day and a half," Ryan replied. "Dehydration? Heat stroke? Borderline collapse? You're lucky. Any longer out there and, well, we might not be having this conversation." Samuel nodded faintly. "The lions." "I saw them," Ryan said before he could finish. "All of us did." Samuel blinked slowly, trying to find the right words. "They stayed with me, guarded me. There were hyenas. They chased them off." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been out here almost as long as you have, Dan. I've seen some strange things in the bush. But that was different." Samuel turned his head slightly. "You think it was him?" Ryan didn't ask who him was. He already knew. "The one you freed years ago," he said softly. "The cub?" Samuel exhaled. "Yeah." Ryan sat back. "You always told me that story like it was just one moment, a one-time thing." "It was," Samuel replied. "At the time, I didn't think I'd ever see him again." Ryan shook his head slowly. "I don't know how to explain it, but when he looked at us, at you, it was like he knew." Samuel stared up at the wooden slats of the infirmary ceiling. His voice came quieter now. "He remembered. Not just that I helped him, he remembered me." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Ryan said, "There's something else." Samuel looked over. "We checked the snare site, the one you found before you collapsed. It had blood on it, fresh. From the spacing of the wires, it was meant for a lion. You must have barely missed them." Samuel's heart sank. "Did it catch one?" "No," Ryan said. "But it was close. That pride might have lost one of their own if you hadn't gone out there. They were lucky." Samuel gave a dry chuckle. Funny, I was the one who nearly didn't make it. You both made it, Ryan said. Because of each other. Later that week, once his strength returned enough to sit up and drink unaided, Samuel asked to be taken outside. The medic frowned at first, but relented when Ryan promised to accompany him. They walked slowly, Samuel leaning heavily on a walking stick, Ryan close at his side, until they reached the overlook point at the southern edge of the station's property. From there you could see the distant rise of the hills and the fringe of the acacia forest where the lions had last been seen. They stood there in silence for a long while. The breeze lifted Samuel's hair, warm and dry. The sky was pink with sunset, painting the plains in gold and fire. Then Ryan said quietly, "You planning to tell the story?" Samuel didn't answer right away. "I'll file my report," he said at last. "Say what needs to be said. But the rest, I think it's for me." Ryan nodded. "For what it's worth, I think they knew. About you. About what you did back then." Samuel exhaled slowly. "You don't think I imagined it?" "No," Ryan said firmly. "I think you earned it." They watched the horizon together, the sky darkening by degrees. Then, as if summoned by thought alone, something stirred in the distance. A shape, barely visible, atop a low ridge. Large, still, proud. Valor. His mane caught the breeze, lit faintly by the dying sun. His gaze was turned toward them. Their eyes met, even from afar. And for a long moment, time seemed to stop. Samuel raised one hand in acknowledgement. He didn't expect the lion to move. But Valor dipped his head, just slightly, then turned and vanished into the long grass. As if to say, "I see you, I remember, and you are safe." The sky was beginning to blush with the first hues of dawn when the moment came. Samuel lay beneath the acacia tree, limp but alive, his chest rising and falling with slow, fragile breaths. His skin was dry and pale, lips cracked, but he clung to the thread of life with quiet resolve. And around him, the lions watched. Valor stood nearest to him, his mane catching the faint morning breeze, golden threads shifting in the soft light. He didn't pace. He didn't roar. He stood as still as the tree behind him, a living statue carved from strength and silence. The lioness, ever alert, rested beside her cub, her body curled protectively as the little one dozed against her flank. One eye remained open, watching, judging. She had not slept a full night since Samuel had fallen here. Neither had Valor. And now the moment had arrived. Voices echoed through the clearing. Footsteps, clinking metal, urgent whispers rising in volume. A half-dozen rangers emerged from the tall grass, their rifles lowered but ready, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected to find a corpse, or signs of a struggle. They hadn't expected a pride of lions standing in formation around their fallen comrade. And certainly not like this. Ryan was the first to step forward. He barely breathed as he approached, his eyes locked on the massive lion just meters from Samuel's body. Valor didn't growl, didn't advance. He simply shifted his head, a slow, deliberate turn toward Samuel, then back to Ryan, as if saying, "This is yours now." The gesture stopped Ryan in his tracks. He stared, not with fear, but with awe. For years he'd patrolled these lands, studied these animals, respected their might. But this was different. This wasn't nature left to its chaos. This was something chosen, purposeful. Slowly, Ryan dropped to his knees beside Samuel, placing 2 fingers against his friend's neck. A pulse, weak but steady. "He's alive!" he called out, relief crashing through his voice like a wave breaking on rock. The other rangers surged forward. But as they moved to lift Samuel, they hesitated. Vala had stepped forward again, just one pace, but enough to fill the space with quiet warning. Ryan froze. The lion's eyes fixed on them, not menacing but commanding. "Wait," Ryan whispered to the others. "Let me try." He knelt fully, placed a hand gently on Samuel's shoulder, and looked back at Vala. "I know you remember him," he said softly. "He saved one of yours once. Now we need to save him." Vala didn't move, but his ears shifted. And then he exhaled. It was almost imperceptible, just a breath. But it came with something final, like the last beat of a drum in a long march. Then Vala stepped back. His body shifted slightly to the right, giving the rangers space to pass. The lioness watched, alert but silent, and did not move to stop them. The cub stirred, blinking sleep from its eyes, as the humans approached the man they didn't know had become sacred in this small circle of wildness. Ryan reached under Samuel's shoulders. Another ranger took his legs. They lifted him gently. The moment was fragile, holy. Dust swirled in the air as they carried him past the lions. Vala stood still, watching. He didn't follow, didn't roar. He only watched, his eyes tracking Samuel's unconscious form as it moved away from the place where he had fallen. Away from the place he had been protected. Ryan paused briefly, turning back to the lion. Their eyes met, man and beast. And Ryan, though not a man prone to fantasy, felt something stir inside him. Gratitude, reverence, connection. "Thank you," he whispered. Vala blinked once. Then he turned. With regal grace, he walked away into the tall grass, the lioness and cub soon following. The pride vanished into the morning light, one by one, like ghosts returning to their place in the untouchable order of things. Back at the station, word of what had happened spread quickly but selectively. The official report noted Samuel's collapse, the heat stroke, and the rescue operation. It mentioned lion activity in the area, but omitted the rest. The way they had stood guard, the cub's presence, the stare that passed between Vala and the rangers. That part wasn't written down, because none of them could find the right words. It wasn't science. It wasn't behavior they could explain. It was something older. Something you didn't speak of, not because it was secret, but because to name it would diminish it. So the rangers remained quiet, going about their duties with something new in their eyes. A softness, a stillness, like they'd witnessed something that reminded them just how little of this land truly belonged to them. Ryan, however, couldn't stop thinking about it. That morning stayed with him. In the way the breeze passed through the trees, in the way birds scattered and returned, in the feel of the sun against his neck. He found himself returning to the clearing once, alone, days later. He stood under the same tree where Samuel had collapsed. The grass had already begun to grow back. There were no paw prints anymore, no broken branches. But Ryan knew. This place remembered. He knelt briefly, brushing a hand against the dirt, then rose and walked away. Meanwhile, Samuel's recovery progressed. His strength returned slowly, like sunlight crawling across the floor. First, the ability to stand. Then, walk short distances. Then, full patrols. But something had changed in him. He spent more time in silence now, not out of trauma, but reflection. He walked slower, watched more carefully. And every morning, before his shift, he would sit on the porch with his coffee and look out toward the western horizon, toward the trees where the lions had vanished. As if he were waiting, not expecting, just acknowledging, honoring. One morning, a ranger came to him and said a tourist had spotted a lion pride not far from the ridge. Samuel asked for the details. The male was large, scarred near one eye, a full, wild mane. A cub had been playing nearby. Samuel didn't say anything. He only nodded. He knew who it was. He knew valor hadn't gone far, and neither had the memory of what passed between them. That bond remained, not through words, not through documentation, but in the quiet understanding shared between one man and one lion, a circle that began with a trap broken years ago, and came full in a night of dust, stars, and golden eyes. The land hadn't changed, but Samuel had. The rains came late that year, and the savannah remained parched, brittle underfoot, stretching out in its eternal golden sprawl. The air carried dust instead of dew, and the winds whispered through the long grass like memories trying to return. But to Samuel everything felt different now, even the silences. He returned to patrol just over 3 weeks after his collapse. Slowly at first. 1 sector, then 2, then back to full rounds. The radio checks became routine again. His canteen never left his side. His steps were measured, not because of fear, but because of newfound reverence. Something inside him had shifted. He no longer moved through the reserve as if he was its protector. Now he walked like a guest, not unwelcome, but unentitled. Every rustle in the grass, every hawk circling above, every distant roar at dusk carried weight. Not threat, significance. The wild was no longer a place he worked in. It was a world he belonged to only by grace. And he had been given that grace by lions? By valor. He found himself drawn back to the acacia tree more often than he admitted. It wasn't a conscious pilgrimage at first. The roots just kept leading there. A new snare site to check, a broken sensor to repair, a camera trap to replace. But every time, he slowed as he approached the clearing. Every time, he paused beneath the tree and stood still. Once, he sat down on the very spot where he had collapsed. The dirt had shifted slightly, filled in by time and wind, but he still felt the memory in his bones, the weight of his failure. The moment he had almost been claimed by heat and thirst, and the moment he was saved. He pressed his hand to the ground. He wasn't religious, never had been, but something sacred had passed through this space, and he honored it the only way he knew how, by remembering. Back at the station, life resumed. The younger rangers resumed their field drills. Reports were filed, maps were updated, briefings delivered. Samuel joined them, of course. He helped train, helped patrol, helped plan, but they all noticed something different about him. His voice was softer, his questions deeper. When asked for advice, he often paused before answering, as though considering something far older than just protocol or policy. And when the lions came up in conversation, he listened first. One evening after dinner, Alyssa approached him as the others shared jokes around the fire pit. "Sir?" she asked, hesitant. He turned to her, coffee cup in hand. "You can drop the sir. Out here? I'm just Samuel." She nodded. "I wanted to ask, do you think they knew what they were doing that day?" He studied her face for a moment. There was no mockery in her eyes, no skepticism, just an honest need to understand. "I think," Samuel said slowly, "that some things in the wild run deeper than instinct." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about how they stood there, just watching, like they knew we were coming." Samuel smiled faintly. "Maybe they did. Do you think it really was the same lion, from the cub you rescued?" He looked up at the stars overhead. "I don't think it was coincidence." She followed his gaze. Silence settled between them. Then, after a while, she said, "Do you think it changed you?" Samuel didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "I think it reminded me of who I was before I forgot." She furrowed her brows slightly. "Before you forgot?" "Yeah," Samuel said, his voice quieter. "Before the routines took over. Before the politics, the quotas, the briefings. There was a time I came out here just to listen, just to learn. Somewhere along the way, I started managing the wild. But that night, those lions, they reminded me, it's not mine to manage." He stood, dusted his hands on his pants. "It's mine to serve." Ryan found him alone the next day. The two men stood on a small rocky overlook above one of the reserve's watering holes, binoculars in hand. A herd of zebras had gathered at the edge of the pool. A few warthogs trotted nearby. Birds dipped and soared across the surface. In the far distance, a lion's roar rolled low across the plains. "Do you think he's watching us right now?" Ryan asked, without looking away from the glass. Samuel smiled. "Probably, but not because he's curious." "Why then?" "Because that's what guardians do," Samuel said. "They stay on the edge, just far enough to see, close enough to protect." Ryan turned to him. "You're talking about him, or yourself?" Samuel gave a small laugh. "Maybe both." Ryan lowered his binoculars. "You never wrote about it." "In the report." Samuel shook his head. "Didn't seem right." "You think it happened for a reason?" "I think it happened because I was meant to remember," Samuel said, then turned to Ryan. "We all forget sometimes what we're actually out here for." Ryan nodded, his voice low. "To protect them." Samuel's eyes drifted back to the plains. "No. To protect the bond." Weeks passed, then months. The lion pride was seen more frequently now, always at a distance. They avoided vehicles, sidestepped human paths, remained ghost-like on the periphery of patrol zones, but Valor's silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, broad, scar across the right brow. One morning a camera trap caught a photo of him. He stood at the edge of a riverbed, the cub beside him, their eyes turned not toward prey, but toward the sunrise. Samuel printed the photo and pinned it to the wall of the main office. No caption, just the image. A few rangers passed it by without comment. Others paused longer. Some returned to look at it again, days later. In that photo, something lived. A feeling, a presence, a memory of something few could name, but all could feel. Trust, loyalty, the silent contract of the wild. One quiet afternoon, Samuel stood once again beneath the old acacia tree. The breeze was warm and steady. The sky was wide and cloudless. The grass swayed around him like a golden tide. He closed his eyes and listened. No trucks, no radios, no chatter, just the rhythm of the land, the creak of bark, the rustle of wings, the breath of the wild itself. In the silence, he heard it again, the soft huff of a lion at rest, the low growl of warning, the giggle of a distant hyena, the cry of a cub seeking comfort. All echoes now, but not gone, never gone. The morning light was softer than usual. It spread across the reserve like a whispered promise, gentle and golden, illuminating the dew-touched tips of the savannah grass. The air held a faint coolness, rare and fleeting, that would soon vanish as the sun climbed higher. But for now, the world felt paused, listening. Samuel stood beside the same acacia tree. He had come alone. No radio, no rifle, no boots thudding against the dirt, just silence and his breath. It had been nearly a year since that day, since the collapse, the rescue, the unspoken guardianship that had turned everything he thought he knew into something sacred. Since then he had resumed his duties, mentored new rangers, walked the same paths. But something in him had never returned. Not fully. because something had been left here, at this tree, in the dust, in the watchful eyes of a lion named Valor, and Samuel had come back to find it. He knelt slowly at the base of the tree, his knees settling into the earth with familiar weight. The bark felt the same, rough and weathered. A few scratches still marked the lower trunk from years of animals passing through. His hand pressed flat against it, palm open. "I haven't forgotten," he said quietly. The words carried on no wind, aimed at no one in particular. And yet they hung there, weighty and real. He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. It wasn't the first time he'd returned to this spot, but it was the first time he had brought something. Unzipping the small canvas satchel he carried, he pulled out a smooth wooden carving. It wasn't intricate, just a simple figure. A lion sitting upright, its mane gently curved, eyes closed as if in rest. It had been carved by a young boy from a village near the reserve's southern border. The boy had brought it to Samuel during an outreach visit, wordlessly handing it over with reverent care. "He said he saw a lion watching from the trees," the boy's mother had translated. "He said it was watching you." Samuel had stared at the carving for a long time. Now, he placed it in the dirt beside the tree. Not as an offering, not as a symbol, but as a marker that said, "Something happened here, something worth remembering." Behind him, the grass stirred. He didn't turn at first. He knew better. The sound was slow, intentional, heavy paw steps that broke no twigs and rustled no branches. Just presence, pure and simple. Then he heard it, a soft exhale, that familiar huff, and he smiled. "You always did arrive without a sound," Samuel murmured, keeping his eyes on the carving. A pause. Then a low rumble, deeper than the first. Not a growl, not a threat. A greeting. He turned, and there he was. Valor stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the shadows, half shrouded in golden light. His mane had grown fuller since the last sighting. There were new scars along his flank, proof that the wild had not spared him, even if he had spared Samuel. But his eyes were the same. That deep, knowing amber. They stared at each other for a long time. Samuel didn't move, neither did Valor. Then, slowly, Valor stepped forward. Just 2 paces. Enough to close the distance between memory and presence. Enough to let Samuel feel the tremble of the ground beneath his paws. The lion lowered his head, and Samuel lowered his. Not in fear, but in acknowledgement. A mutual recognition of something forged in pain, sharpened by survival, and sealed in silence. A bond. Not tame, not trained, but real and lasting. Valor turned his head slightly, his gaze flicking toward the wooden lion figure resting beside the tree. He stepped closer, his nose brushing the dirt just beside it, then inhaled deeply. His breath stirred dust into the air, swirling it around the carving like a dance. Then, as if satisfied, he stepped back and sat. Samuel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. There were no words for this. No protocol. No rule-book, no scientific label, only presence. For what felt like an eternity, they remained that way, man and lion, sitting under the same tree, beneath the same sky, no barriers between them. The wind moved around them, gentle and playful, ruffling Valor's mane and tugging lightly at Samuel's sleeves. Birds passed overhead. A few impalas flickered at the edge of the clearing, pausing, sensing, then darting away. The world turned, and still they sat. Eventually, Valor stood. He looked at Samuel one last time, eyes lingering. the way one might glance back at a friend before stepping into a journey that couldn't be shared. Then he turned and walked away. No sound, no rush, just the quiet exit of a king who had never needed an audience. Samuel watched him go, not with sadness, but with peace, because some part of him knew this was not the last time. Not if you listened, not if you remembered. Weeks passed. The carving remained beneath the tree, weathered now by sun and dust. Some days it was buried partially by wind-blown grass. Other days it sat exposed again, as if someone or something had uncovered it. No one touched it. Not the rangers, not the animals. It stayed exactly where it belonged. And Samuel? He continued his work. He taught the new recruits how to listen, not just hear, how to see with patience, not just sight, how to walk with reverence, not just direction. And sometimes, when the new rangers asked about lions, how to track them, how to behave around them, he'd smile faintly and offer only this: remember that they see more than we do. One quiet evening near the end of dry season, Samuel found himself at the overlook again. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the horizon. The sky was ablaze with orange and violet. Far in the distance, he heard a roar, low and strong. Not a warning, a declaration. A voice in the wild saying, "I am still here." And Samuel whispered back, his voice nearly lost in the wind, "So am I." He placed a hand over his heart, not out of ceremony, but gratitude, because the wild had changed him, not just through survival, but through trust, because he had once saved a cub without knowing what it would mean, and years later, that cub had saved him back, because some bonds, though wordless, wild, and nearly impossible to explain, are never truly broken.